Tonight, we are going to spend some quiet time together, exploring one of the most tender and important teachings in all of Buddhist wisdom. It is simply this: you are already enough. Not someday. Not after you have fixed yourself or solved your problems or become the person you think you should be. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The Buddha once said that every being already possesses the wisdom and goodness they seek. It is already here, the way the sun is already shining behind the clouds on a grey afternoon. We do not need to create it. We only need to gently clear away what covers it. So tonight, through quiet stories and ancient teachings, we will explore together what it might feel like to set down the heavy weight of self-judgment, even just for a little while. And perhaps, by the end, something in you will feel a little lighter, a little softer, a little more at home in your own skin. There is nothing you need to do right now except rest and listen. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. There is an old Zen saying that goes like this: sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself. It is a teaching about trust, about what happens when we stop forcing life to look a certain way and simply allow it to be what it already is. Tonight, we begin with a story about biscuits. It may seem like a small thing, biscuits. But as you will see, sometimes the smallest things hold the deepest teachings. And this story, in its own quiet way, holds a teaching that could change the way you see your entire life. There is a story about a young man who arrived at a monastery tucked deep in the mountains. He had come searching for something, the way so many of us search, though he could not have told you exactly what it was. Peace, perhaps. Purpose. Some sense that his life made sense. The monastery was a quiet, simple place. Stone paths wound between wooden buildings. Cedar and pine stood along the hillside, their branches dark and still against the morning sky. In the valleys below, mist gathered like a soft grey blanket each dawn, and the only sounds were bird song, the distant murmur of a creek, and the slow, steady rhythm of the monastery bell calling the monks to sit. Life here was unhurried. The monks rose before the sun. They sat in meditation as the first pale light crept through the windows. They tended the garden, pulling weeds and watering seedlings with the same quiet attention they gave to their breath on the cushion. They studied, they swept the stone paths, and they cooked. It was in the kitchen that this young man found his unexpected place. He had not come to the monastery to cook. Like so many who find their way to such places, he had come carrying questions that had no easy answers. He wanted to understand his own restless mind. He wanted peace. He imagined himself sitting in deep meditation, perhaps on a mountaintop, having some great breakthrough that would finally make him feel whole. Instead, the old teacher looked at him with kind, unhurried eyes and said simply, "You will work in the kitchen. That is where your practice begins." The young man was surprised, perhaps a little disappointed. But there was something in the teacher's voice, a warmth, a certainty that made it impossible to argue. And so he tied on a worn cotton apron, rolled up his sleeves, and stepped into the kitchen for the first time. The room was warm and smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs. Copper pots hung from hooks along the wall. A long wooden counter, smooth from years of use, ran beneath a window that looked out over the valley. It was a humble room, but it was, he would later discover a room full of wisdom. At first, he found the work humbling but beautiful. There is something deeply grounding about working with food. The cool weight of flour in a measuring cup, the quiet hiss of butter warming in a pan, the way bread dough yields beneath your hands as you knead it, soft and alive. But there was one thing that troubled him, and it troubled him deeply. He could not get his biscuits right. He tried recipe after recipe. He adjusted the flour and the butter and the milk. He changed the temperature of the oven, the thickness of the dough, the size of each piece. He tried rolling them thin. He tried shaping them thick. He tried every variation he could think of. And yet, each time he pulled a tray from the oven and broke open a warm biscuit, something was wrong. They did not taste the way biscuits were supposed to taste. The other monks would reach for them eagerly. "These are wonderful," they would say, reaching for a second, and sometimes a third. "So flaky, so warm, what a gift." But he could not hear them, because inside his mind, a quiet, insistent voice kept saying, "These are not right. These are not what biscuits should be." Now, here is where the story turns, and it is worth slowing down for this part, because it holds the seed of something important. You see, this young cook had grown up in a world of convenience. Before coming to the monastery, the biscuits he knew came from two places. One was a box of ready-made mix. You simply added milk, stirred, dropped spoonfuls of dough onto a pan, and that was that. Quick and easy. The other was even simpler. These biscuits came in a cardboard tube. You tapped the tube against the edge of the counter. It popped open with a satisfying little burst, and inside were perfectly shaped, perfectly uniform rounds of dough. You placed them on a tray, slid them into the oven, and 20 minutes later, out came biscuits that were golden and soft and exactly the same every single time. He loved those biscuits from the tube. To him, that was what a biscuit should taste like. And so, without realizing it, every time he baked in the monastery kitchen, he was comparing what came out of his oven to a memory. He was holding his handmade, hand-kneaded, real biscuits up against a factory-made product that had been designed, tested, and manufactured to taste a certain way. A product wrapped in bright packaging, with a cheerful logo, promising perfection. His biscuits never stood a chance. Not because they were lacking, but because the standard he was measuring them against was never real. The Buddha once taught that much of our suffering comes not from what is, but from the distance between what is and what we believe should be. He called this clinging. We cling to how things ought to look, how they ought to feel, how they ought to taste. And in that clinging, we miss entirely the beauty of what is already here, warm and present, right in our hands. This is what was happening to our young cook. He was holding a warm, handmade biscuit, fresh from the oven of a mountain monastery, made with real butter and real flour and his own two hands. And he could not taste it. He could not taste it because his mind was somewhere else, comparing it to a memory of something that came from a factory in a cardboard tube. How often do we do this? Not just with biscuits, but with everything. We hold our real, living, breathing life up against some image in our mind of how life should look. We compare our body to a photograph. We compare our home to a magazine. We compare our relationship to a story. We compare our inner world, messy and complicated and beautifully human, to some calm, polished idea of how a person should feel. And in that comparison, we miss what is actually here. Let us return to the kitchen, because the story is not over. For a long time, the young cook continued in this way, baking, comparing, feeling that something was wrong. And then one morning, something shifted. He had risen early, as he always did. The sky outside the kitchen window was still dark, but along the edge of the mountains, the faintest line of pale gold was beginning to show. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of a mixing bowl and the gentle rush of water from the tap. He made his dough as he always did. He shaped his biscuits and placed them in the oven. And when the timer rang and he pulled the tray out into the morning air, the kitchen filled with that warm golden smell that only fresh baking can bring. He broke open a biscuit. Steam rose from its center in a slow, soft curl, catching the first rays of morning light. And in that moment, something happened. Or rather, something stopped happening. He did not think about the biscuits from the tube. He did not think about the mix from the box. He did not compare this biscuit to anything at all. The measuring, the judging, the constant quiet voice that said, "Not right." It simply fell silent, the way wind falls silent just before dawn. He simply tasted it. And what he tasted was unlike anything he had experienced before. Not because the recipe was different. The recipe was the same as always. What was different was that, for the first time, he was actually here for it. He was present. He was tasting without a filter, without a standard, without anywhere else to be. The biscuit was warm and flaky. It was buttery and rich. There was a nuttiness from the flour, an earthiness, something almost sweet from the grain itself. It was dense and light at the same time. It tasted like the mountain morning, like the wooden kitchen, like the hands that had made it, like real, honest, handmade food, offered with care and sincerity, even if imperfectly, especially because imperfectly. It was, he realized, incomparably alive. He stood there in the quiet kitchen, the early light now warming the window, a soft, golden rectangle spreading across the counter, and he held this simple biscuit in his hands, and he understood something that all his months of meditation had been pointing toward. There was nothing wrong with his biscuits. There had never been anything wrong with them. Not once. The only problem had been the comparison. The only thing standing between him and the full, rich experience of his own life was a mental image of how it was supposed to be. And in that moment, for the first time since arriving at the monastery, he felt a deep and quiet peace. Not the dramatic peace he had imagined when he first walked through the gates, some thunderbolt of enlightenment. Just a simple, warm, ordinary peace. The peace of being exactly where he was, holding exactly what he had, and needing nothing else. The other monks came to breakfast that morning and ate the biscuits as they always did, happily, gratefully, reaching for seconds. But this time, so did he. There is a phrase from one of the great Zen ancestors that has been passed down for many hundreds of years. It says simply this: true freedom is being without anxiety about non-perfection. Let those words settle for a moment. Being without anxiety about non-perfection. Not being perfect. Not even trying to be perfect. But simply not being anxious about the fact that you are not. There is a lovely old story about two monks walking through the countryside on a spring afternoon. The younger monk was troubled. He had been meditating for several years and felt he was making no progress. I still get angry, he told the elder monk. I still get distracted. I still want things I should not want. I feel I am the same as when I began. The elder monk said nothing for a while. They walked in silence past a meadow where wildflowers grew in every direction, scattered and uneven, some tall, some short, some just beginning to open, and others already fading. Finally, the elder monk stopped and gestured to the meadow. Tell me, he said, is this meadow perfect? The young monk looked at the tangle of flowers and grasses and said, No, of course not. It is wild and uneven. The elder monk smiled. And yet, is it not beautiful? The young monk was quiet. He looked again at the meadow. The afternoon light was catching the tops of the flowers, and a gentle breeze moved through them in slow, soft waves. It was, he realized, one of the most beautiful things he had ever seen. Your life is this meadow, the elder monk said. It does not need to be a formal garden to be whole. And they walked on. What would it feel like to see your own life this way? Really, just for a moment, consider it. Right now, wherever you are, whatever your day has been, whatever you are carrying, what if you simply were not anxious about any of it? What if the dishes in the sink were just dishes in the sink? What if the words you said this morning that you wish you could take back were just words, already spoken, already dissolving into the past? What if the extra weight, or the wrinkles, or the messy house, or the unfinished project, or the argument, or the loneliness, or the confusion were all just part of the beautiful, imperfect texture of a real human life? What if, even for a breath or two, there was nothing fundamentally wrong? Not a single thing. The Zen master was not saying that life has no difficulties. Of course it does. He was saying that freedom comes when we stop adding a layer of anxiety on top of those difficulties. When we stop squeezing ourselves for not being enough. Even a small taste of this is a taste of freedom. Even a glimpse, just a moment where the grip loosens and you think, oh, I am okay. Right now, I am actually okay. Even that small glimpse is worth everything. The young cook later reflected on what had happened to him in that mountain kitchen, and he wrote about it with great tenderness. He noticed that all along, while he had been struggling to make the perfect biscuit, the monks around him had been enjoying every single one. They had been tasting what was actually there. He was the only one who could not taste it, because he was the only one measuring it against something else. He wrote about how we all do this. We spend years trying to make our life look right, trying to cover the faults, trying to conceal the mess. We know what the polished, packaged version is supposed to look like. The calm and collected parent, the successful and confident professional, the serene and centered person who never gets ruffled. We know the image, and we exhaust ourselves trying to match it. He used a phrase that is both funny and heartbreaking. He said our motto, if we are honest, is simply looking good. But what if we let that go? What if we stop trying to make life look like the picture on the package and instead actually tasted it? What if we handled each ingredient of our day, each feeling, each conversation, each small task with care and sincerity, and then simply trusted that the results would be what they would be? Handle each ingredient with sincerity and wholeheartedness, he wrote. The results will take care of themselves. There is such peace in those words, such quiet, steady permission. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a teaching that says our comparing mind is one of the deepest and most stubborn patterns we carry. It is said to be one of the very last habits to dissolve on the path to awakening, because it is woven so deeply into how we see. It is like a pair of glasses we have worn for so long that we have forgotten we are wearing them at all. We are almost always comparing. We compare ourselves to others. We compare ourselves to who we used to be or who we think we should become. We compare this moment to a memory of a better moment or to a fantasy of a future one. We compare our insides, messy and uncertain, to other people's outsides, which always seem so polished and sure. Think of how many times today alone your mind may have measured, weighed, or evaluated. Perhaps you compared how you look to how someone else looks. Perhaps you compared how much you accomplished to how much you feel you should have. Perhaps you compared the quietness of your evening to the life you imagine others are living. It is constant, this measuring, and it is so gentle and habitual that it feels like just the way things are. And this comparing mind does something very specific. It almost always finds us lacking. Almost always, the verdict is not enough. Not attractive enough, not successful enough, not calm enough, not spiritual enough, not disciplined enough, not loving enough. It is a quiet voice, this comparing mind. It does not shout. It simply hums in the background of our days, this soft, persistent whisper, you should be different than you are. And we believe it. We believe it so completely that we do not even notice it is there. It is like water to a fish, so constant and so everywhere that it becomes invisible. But what the cook discovered in his mountain kitchen, and what the old Zen masters have been pointing to for 1,000 years, is that the comparison is the problem. Not you, not your life, not your biscuits. The comparison. The moment he stopped comparing was the moment he could finally taste. And perhaps that is true for all of us. So here is a gentle invitation as we rest together tonight. You do not need to do anything with this. You do not need to fix anything or change anything. But you might, just for a moment, consider this question. What are the biscuits of your life right now? What is here, warm and real and present, that you might be missing because you are comparing it to some image of how it should be? Maybe it is a relationship that does not look the way you thought it would, but is full of its own quiet tenderness. Maybe it is a body that does not match the picture in your mind, but that carries you faithfully through every single day. Maybe it is a home that feels too small or too cluttered, but that holds you and keeps you warm on nights like this. Maybe it is just this moment, this breath, this softness, which is so easy to overlook because we are always reaching for the next thing. And what might it feel like to simply taste this moment, just as it is? The old Zen teachers had a lovely way of putting it. They would say, when you eat, just eat. When you walk, just walk. When you rest, just rest. Not eating while wishing you were eating something better. Not resting while worrying about tomorrow. Just this. Just here. Just this one simple, ordinary, extraordinary moment. The Buddha said, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. And the present moment, it turns out, is always enough. It is always whole. It is only our comparing mind that tells us otherwise. So perhaps tonight, as you lie here, you can let your biscuits be your biscuits. Let your life be your life. Not the life from the package. Not the life from the advertisement. Not anyone else's life. Just yours, warm and real and flaky and imperfect and absolutely incomparably alive. That is enough. You are enough. And even a small taste of that knowing is a taste of freedom. Let us pause here for a moment. Notice how you are feeling right now, just gently. And when you are ready, we will continue together. Have you ever noticed that there is a list inside your mind? It is not written down anywhere. Nobody handed it to you on a piece of paper. And yet it is there, running quietly in the background of nearly every moment, like a song you cannot quite stop humming. It is a list of how things should be, how your body should look, how much energy you should have, how patient you should be with the people you love, how far along you should be in your work, your healing, your life, how your home should feel when you walk through the door, how calm and steady and clear you should be on the inside. We all carry this list, and most of the time, we do not even know it is there. It just runs, silently, and we measure ourselves against it 100 times a day without ever pausing to ask a very simple question. Where did this list come from? And is any of it actually true? There is an old teaching story about a young fish swimming through the ocean. One morning, she passed an older fish resting near a bed of coral. "Good morning," said the older fish. "How is the water today?" The young fish paused, confused. She swam on a little further and then turned to her friend beside her and said, "What on earth is water?" This little story has been told in many traditions, in many ways, because it points to something so important. The things that surround us most completely are often the very things we cannot see. And for most of us, the water we swim in, the invisible thing that is everywhere and yet nowhere, is this quiet, constant habit of measuring ourselves against standards we never chose. The Buddha had a word for this. He called it papanka, which is sometimes translated as the mind's tendency to elaborate, to take something simple and spin it into a tangled web of stories and judgments. A feeling of tiredness becomes, "I am lazy." A moment of impatience becomes, "I am a bad parent." A quiet evening at home becomes, "My life is not enough." The feeling itself is just a feeling. It comes and it goes, like weather. But the mind takes that feeling and runs with it, comparing, measuring, judging, and before we know it, we are lost in a story about how we are falling short of something. And that something, that invisible standard, is almost never examined. So let us examine it together, gently, as we rest here tonight. Let us explore a story about a woman who spent many years of her life in service to others. She had always been drawn to helping. Even as a young girl, she was the one who noticed when someone was struggling. She would sit with the lonely child at school. She would bring soup to elderly neighbors when the weather turned cold. There was a warmth in her, a genuine care for others that was as natural as breathing. As she grew older, this calling deepened. She traveled to distant places, far from the comforts of home, and worked alongside women living in the most difficult circumstances. She helped build small schools in villages where there had been none. She organized efforts to bring clean water to communities that had gone without. She sat in dusty rooms and listened to women tell their stories, and she held their hands, and she did not look away. Year after year, she gave herself to this work. She slept on thin mattresses in hot, crowded rooms. She ate simple meals. She missed holidays with her own family. And she did it willingly, because this was what mattered to her. This was what her heart called her to do. And by any measure, she was making a difference. The people around her could see it. The women she worked with could see it. Her colleagues would sometimes say to her, "Do you realize how many lives you have touched?" And she would smile and nod, but inside, she felt something very different. Inside, she carried a quiet ache that never went away. It was the feeling that she was not doing enough. No matter how many hours she worked, no matter how many people she helped, no matter how far she traveled or how much she gave, that voice was there. Soft but persistent. You could be doing more. You should be doing more. This is not enough. You are not enough. She carried it the way you might carry a stone in your pocket, always aware of its weight, always reaching down to touch it, but never quite taking it out to look at it in the light. And because she never looked at it directly, it just stayed there, year after year, pressing against her quietly, making even her most meaningful days feel somehow hollow. One day, she sat with a kind counselor, someone she trusted, and spoke about this feeling for the first time. It had taken her years to even say it aloud. She described the work she had done, the villages, the women, the years she had given. And then, almost in a whisper, she said, "But I do not think it is enough. I never feel like it is enough." The counselor listened with great care, the way a still pond receives a stone, without resistance, simply taking it in. And after a long silence, the counselor asked her one question. What would be enough? The woman opened her mouth to answer. She was ready with something, surely. A number, a goal, a milestone. But the words did not come. She sat very still. The room was quiet, and her eyes filled with tears, not tears of sadness exactly, but the kind of tears that come when something you have carried for a very long time is finally seen, finally held up to the light. Because she realized in that quiet moment that she did not have an answer. There was no amount. There was no finish line. There was no point at which the voice would say, "There. Now you have done enough. Now you can rest." The standard she had been measuring herself against was not a real thing. It had no shape, no edges, no endpoint. It was a feeling, a formless, bottomless feeling of not enough that had nothing to do with what she actually did or did not do. It was like trying to fill a cup with no bottom. You could pour and pour and pour, and it would never be full. Not because you were not pouring enough, but because the cup itself could not hold it. "I do not know," she said finally, and there was wonder in her voice, as if she was seeing something for the first time. "I have never known what would be enough." And the counselor nodded gently and said, "Perhaps that is because enough was never something you needed to earn." This is one of the quiet sorrows of being human. We carry these impossible standards inside us, and because they are impossible, we can never meet them. And because we can never meet them, we walk through our days with this low, constant hum of inadequacy, like a radio playing softly in another room that we have stopped noticing, but that colors everything we do and feel and see. And the standards reach into every corner of our lives, not just the big things. There is a standard for how our body should look, and it changes depending on the season, the decade, the culture, the photograph we happen to see that morning. It is always moving, always just out of reach, like a horizon line that retreats as fast as you walk toward it. There is a standard for how we should feel, We should be happy, or at least content, and if we are not, something must be wrong with us. If we feel anxious on a sunny day, if we feel lonely in a crowded room, if we feel heavy when everything in our life looks fine on the outside, there is that quiet judgment. You should not feel this way. There is a standard for how we should parent, how patient we should be, how creative, how present. A standard for how we should love, how romantic, how attentive, how easy it should all be. A standard for how we should age, for how we should handle difficulty, for how quickly we should heal after something hurts. Even rest has a standard now. We should rest productively. We should rest in a way that recharges us efficiently so that we can get back to being productive. Even lying here, listening to these words, there might be a small voice wondering if you are relaxing correctly. It would be funny if it were not so painful. And it is painful in its quiet way. Not a sharp pain, but a dull one. The kind that you get so used to you forget it is even there. An ancient Zen teacher once said, "In the pursuit of the way, the greatest danger is a mind that compares." He was pointing to exactly this. Not that we should stop thinking altogether or stop caring about how we live, but that this constant, automatic measuring of ourselves against standards we never consciously chose and can never fully meet is one of the deepest sources of unnecessary suffering in a human life. Let us sit with another story for a moment. There was once a young man who loved to paint. As a child, he would spend whole afternoons with his brushes and colors, sitting on the floor of his family's small house, completely absorbed, completely happy. He painted trees and rivers and faces and animals. He painted wild, joyful, imperfect things, and he loved every one of them. He would hold up a painting of a lopsided horse to his mother and beam, and she would put it on the wall, and he would stand back and admire it as if it were the finest thing in the world. And in a way it was, because it was made freely. It was made without measurement, without comparison, without any thought at all about whether it was good enough. It simply was. As he grew older, he began to study with teachers who showed him how other painters worked. He saw paintings of breathtaking skill, works of such beauty and precision that they made him catch his breath. And something shifted in him, quietly, the way a door closes so softly you do not hear the click. He began to compare. Each time he sat down to paint, the images of those masterful works floated before his eyes like ghosts. And his own brushstrokes, which had once felt so free and alive, now seemed clumsy, uncertain, not enough. He would begin a painting, step back, and feel a sinking in his stomach. That is not right. That line is wrong. A real painter would not do it this way. He painted less and less. The joy drained out of it, slowly, like water from a cracked vessel. It was not that his skill had diminished. If anything, he had learned a great deal. His technique had improved, his eye had sharpened, but the freedom was gone. The simple delight of putting brush to canvas and seeing what wanted to emerge had been replaced by a tight, anxious striving to match a standard that was never his to begin with. One afternoon, his old teacher found him sitting alone in his studio, staring at a blank canvas. Brushes lay untouched on the table beside him. The teacher sat down quietly and looked at him for a long time. Then he said something very simple. "You have forgotten how to paint for the painting. You are only painting for the result." The young man looked up. "But the result matters," he said. "If it is not good, what is the point?" The teacher smiled gently, the way someone smiles when they recognize an old, familiar struggle. "Tell me," he said, "when you were a child and you painted a crooked tree with the sun too big and the river going the wrong way, did you think it was not good?" "No," the young man said quietly. "I thought it was wonderful." "And what changed?" The young man was silent for a long time. Through the window, the late afternoon light fell across the empty canvas, turning it gold. And then he said, very softly, "I learned what it was supposed to look like." The teacher nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "and that is what took the life out of it. Now you must learn, gently, to forget." This is what the Zen tradition sometimes calls beginner's mind. It is the mind that does not yet know what things are supposed to look like. It is fresh and open and curious and unafraid. It paints crooked trees and loves them. It bakes imperfect biscuits and eats them with delight. It lives a messy, unfinished, beautiful life and does not waste a single moment wishing it was someone else's. A beloved Zen teacher once said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." And this is true not only for painting or cooking, but for the way we see ourselves. The more we learn about how we are supposed to be, the more we narrow the range of who we allow ourselves to actually be. The more standards we accumulate, the smaller the space becomes in which we feel acceptable. When we are young, before the comparing begins in earnest, there is a natural wholeness. A child does not look in the mirror and think, "I should be different." A child does not finish playing and evaluate her performance. A child runs and falls and gets up and runs again, without shame, without the heavy weight of self-evaluation. There is just life, happening, fully and freely, the way a stream flows without wondering if it is flowing correctly. And then, slowly, the standards arrive. From the culture, from school, from family, from the images all around us. They come so gradually that we do not notice them settling in, like snow falling quietly through the night. And by morning, everything is covered. We begin to measure, and the measuring never stops. But here is what is worth knowing, what is worth resting in tonight. The standards are not real. They feel real. They feel as solid and certain as the ground beneath you. But they are made of thought. They are mental images, ideas about how things should be, that shift and change and contradict each other and can never, ever be fully met. They are clouds that look like mountains, convincing from a distance, but when you walk toward them, there is nothing solid there at all. And you, the real you, the one who is here right now, breathing, listening, resting, you are not an idea. You are not a standard to be met. You are a living being, whole and complete, with your own texture and shape and warmth. You are, as that young cook discovered on his quiet mountain morning, incomparably alive. The woman who spent her life in service, the one who could not feel she had done enough, did eventually find some peace with this. But it did not come from doing more. It did not come from working harder, or traveling further, or giving up more of herself. It came from seeing, truly seeing, that the standard she was measuring herself against did not actually exist. When the counselor asked, "What would be enough?" and she realized she had no answer, that was the beginning of her freedom. It was like waking up from a dream she did not know she was having. The measuring stick she had been using her entire life turned out to be made of smoke. It had no edges, no markings, no end point. It was just a feeling, dressed up as a fact. And once she saw that, something in her began to soften. She did not stop serving. She did not stop caring. She still gave, generously and fully. But she gave from a different place. She gave from fullness rather than from lack. She gave from the simple wish to be of help, rather than from the anxious, driven feeling of trying to fill a bottomless cup. And she could finally receive too. She could sit in the evening after a long day and feel the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, without that voice whispering, "But it is not enough." And that made all the difference. The Buddha once said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." And perhaps this is part of what he meant, that no amount of external accomplishment, no amount of doing and striving and proving can bring us peace if we are carrying an impossible standard inside. The peace comes first from seeing the standard for what it is, gently, without judgment, and letting it rest, not forcing it away, not fighting it, just seeing it clearly, the way you might see a cloud for what it is, and choosing, in this moment, to be still. So as you lie here tonight, you might allow yourself to wonder, what are the impossible standards you are carrying? Not to judge yourself for carrying them. That would just be adding another layer of judgment on top of the pile, and we have quite enough of that already. Just to notice them, gently, the way you might notice clouds drifting across a wide evening sky. They are there. They have been there for a long time. And you do not need to do anything about them right now. You can simply notice and perhaps feel, even for a moment, what it is like to set them down. The way you might set down a heavy bag after a long walk. Not throwing it away, just setting it down on the soft ground beside you. Letting your shoulders drop, letting your arms rest. Letting your whole body sigh with the relief of not holding on so tightly. There is an old saying in the Zen tradition, "Let go or be dragged." And there is gentleness even in that directness. It is not a command. It is an invitation. It is a kind hand on your shoulder saying, "You do not have to carry all of this. You can put it down, even just for tonight. You are not your standards. You are not the voice that says, 'Not enough.' You are the one who is here, present and breathing, listening to these words in the quiet of the evening. And that, dear friend, all by itself, is more than enough." Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath and let it go slowly. And when you are ready, we will continue together. A long time ago, a great poet and mystic from the East wrote something that has traveled across centuries and continents, passed from teacher to student, whispered in quiet rooms and carried in the hearts of seekers everywhere. He wrote, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Let those words land softly, because they change everything. Most of us spend our lives looking for love, looking for belonging, looking for the feeling of being at home in our own skin, at home with others, at home in the world. We look for it in relationships, in achievement, in the approval of others, in the next thing and the next thing and the next. And when we do not find it, or when we find it and it does not last, we assume the problem is that we have not looked hard enough. That love is somewhere out there, and we just need to keep searching. But this old poet was saying something very different. He was saying that love is not missing. It is not out there somewhere, waiting to be found. It is already here. It has always been here. The only reason we cannot feel it is that we have built walls around our own heart, and those walls keep it from reaching us. And the bricks of those walls, more often than not, are made of blame. Now, when we hear the word blame, we might think of something dramatic, a harsh accusation, a pointed finger, a raised voice. But the kind of blame we are talking about tonight is much quieter than that. It is the daily, habitual, almost invisible kind. The kind that runs beneath the surface of our lives like an underground stream, so constant and so familiar that we barely notice it anymore. It sounds like this: I should not have said that. Why did I eat that? I should be further along by now. What is wrong with me? I always do this. I will never get it right. It is the voice that greets you first thing in the morning when you remember something you wish you had done differently. It is the voice that visits you at night when the house is quiet and there is nothing left to distract you from yourself. And most of the time, we do not even recognize it as blame. It just feels like thinking. It feels like being responsible. It feels like paying attention to what needs to be fixed. But if we slow down and really listen to it, really feel what it does to us, we start to notice something. This voice does not make us better. It does not make us kinder or more capable or more loving. It makes us smaller, tighter, more afraid. It is, as that ancient poet saw so clearly, a barrier, and it stands between us and the love that is already here. Let us explore a story about this. There was once a gardener who tended a beautiful walled garden in a quiet valley. The garden had been in her family for generations. It was the kind of place that felt ancient and alive at the same time, as though the soil itself remembered every hand that had ever turned it. Inside its old stone walls grew fruit trees heavy with apples and pears in autumn. Flowering vines climbed the southern wall, their blossoms opening in the warm months like small, pink palms. There were rows of herbs that filled the air with the scent of rosemary and thyme when you brushed against them. Tall grasses grew along the eastern edge and swayed in the afternoon wind with a soft, whispering sound. And at the center of the garden, there was a small pond where dragonflies skimmed the surface in summer, their wings catching the light, and birds came in the early morning to drink and bathe in the shallow water. It was a place of deep peace. Anyone who visited could feel it immediately upon stepping through the gate, that quality of stillness and aliveness that certain places have, as though the garden itself were breathing, as though it were happy to see you. But over the years, the gardener had become worried. She loved her garden so much that she began to notice every flaw, every imperfection, every place where things were not quite right. A branch that grew crookedly when all the others grew straight. A patch of dark moss spreading across the stone wall. Weeds that kept returning no matter how many times she pulled them, stubborn and persistent. Leaves that fell and cluttered the gravel paths. A rose bush that bloomed unevenly, full and generous on one side, sparse and thin on the other. And so she began to build. Not with any grand plan, not all at once, but slowly and steadily, the way habits form, she began adding walls within the garden. A low wall here to hide the uneven rose bush from view. A taller wall there to block the sight of the mossy stones. A wooden fence around the section where the weeds were worst, so that no one would see them. A screen of woven reeds near the pond, because the water sometimes grew murky after rain, and she did not want visitors to see it that way. She did this because she loved the garden. Each wall was built with the best of intentions. Each one was meant to make things better, to present only what was beautiful, to hide what fell short of her vision of how the garden should be. But something happened that she did not expect. With each new wall, the garden grew smaller. Less sunlight reached the plants that needed it. Less air moved through the winding paths. The birds, who needed open space and long sight lines to feel safe, came less and less often. The pond, now surrounded by tall screens, grew still and stagnant without the breeze to stir its surface. The herbs, blocked from the afternoon sun by a new wall, began to wilt. One morning, the gardener stood at the gate and looked at what had become of her beautiful garden. And she realized, with a shock that took her breath away, that in trying to hide every imperfection, she had walled herself away from the very beauty she loved. The garden was still there. The fruit trees, the flowering vines, the dragonflies, the bird song, all of it was still there, behind the walls. She had not destroyed it. She had simply made it impossible to reach. This is what we do with blame. Each time we judge ourselves, each time we think I should be different, or that was not good enough, or what is wrong with me, we are adding another small wall. And each wall, on its own, seems reasonable. It seems like we are just being honest with ourselves, just keeping ourselves in line. But over time, the walls accumulate, and we find ourselves living in a very small space, cut off from our own warmth, our own openness, our own natural goodness. The Buddha spoke often about this. He taught that within every being, there is what he called our original nature, which is awareness and kindness and a deep, natural capacity for love. He compared it to the sun. The sun does not stop shining because clouds cover the sky. It is always there, always radiant, always warm. We just cannot see it when the clouds are thick. And what are the clouds? They are the habits of mind that obscure our true nature. The judgments, the fears, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and who we are not, the blame. There is an important distinction to make here, and it is worth pausing for, because it makes all the difference between a life that grows and a life that shrinks. There is a kind of clear seeing that notices when something is not working. A gardener who sees that a plant needs more water and gives it water. A parent who notices that a certain way of speaking to their child creates distance and gently, curiously, tries another way. A friend who realizes she has been so busy that she has not called someone she cares about in weeks and picks up the phone. A person who notices that when they eat certain foods late at night, they feel heavy and unwell the next morning and begins to make a different choice. This is what we might call wisdom or clear seeing. It is awake and honest, and it helps us grow. It notices what is happening, and it responds with care. There is a gentleness in it, even when it sees something difficult. There is curiosity. There is openness. It says, "This is not working. What might work better?" It is the voice of a kind teacher, not a harsh one. But there is another kind of seeing that looks the same on the surface but feels entirely different underneath. It is judging. And the difference between the two is not always in what is noticed, but in the tone, the feeling, the energy beneath it. Judgment says, "This is not working because you are failing." because there is something wrong with you, because you are not enough and maybe you never will be. There is a tightness in it, a heaviness, a closing down. It does not open any doors. It locks them. It does not invite growth. It freezes us in place. Wisdom and judgment might notice the very same thing. The same late-night meal, the same sharp word to a child, the same neglected friendship. But wisdom holds it with warmth and moves towards something better. Judgment holds it with a fist and pushes us further into shame. And here is what is worth knowing. Most of us learned judgment first. It was in the air we breathed growing up. It was in the voices around us, in the atmosphere of our homes, in the way correction was delivered, in the unspoken feeling that we were not quite meeting some invisible mark. And because we learned it so young, so early, it feels as natural as breathing. It feels like it is helping, but it is not helping. It is building walls. Now, here is where the story deepens, and where that old poet's teaching becomes even more beautiful. Because years after his words were first written down, a scholar studying the original text discovered that the teaching contained a line that had been left out of most translations. The poet did not just say, "Find the barriers you have built against love." He also said, "And embrace them." Embrace them. Not tear them down with force. Not attack them with willpower. Not judge yourself for having built them in the first place, which would just be adding another brick to the wall. But embrace them. The way you might embrace a small child who is frightened and does not know why. The way you might wrap a blanket around someone who has been out in the cold for a long time. With tenderness, with warmth, with the quiet message that says, "I see you, and it is all right." This is so different from how most of us approach our own patterns. When we see that we have been judgmental, or closed, or afraid, our first instinct is often to judge ourselves for that, too. I should not be so judgmental. I should not be so afraid. What is wrong with me that I keep building these walls? And so the cycle continues. Wall upon wall upon wall. Judgment upon judgment. Blame for the blame. But what if, instead of all that, we simply said, "Oh, there it is again. I have been down on myself. I have been closing my heart." And then, instead of picking up another brick, we just stood there for a moment and let ourselves feel the tenderness of it, the humanness of it, the quiet sadness of how long we have been doing this without knowing. And instead of hardening against that sadness, we let it soften us. We let it open something. Because sadness, when it is held with kindness, does not make us weaker. It makes us more real. It makes us more available to life. It is the heart's way of saying, "This matters to me. I care about this." There is a teaching in the Buddhist tradition that says, compassion is not something we create. It is something we uncover. Like clearing fallen leaves from a garden path, we do not make the path. The path is already there, solid and true beneath our feet. We simply remove what has been covering it. And the same is true for love. We do not have to create love. We do not have to earn it or find it or build it from scratch. We simply need to notice the walls we have built, gently, kindly, without adding another wall of judgment on top, and let them soften. Let them thin. Let the light come through, the way morning light comes through curtains when you draw them back. There is a lovely story about a traveler making a long journey through the mountains. He had been walking for many days, and was weary in the way that only a long journey can make you weary, not just in the body, but in the spirit. The path was steep and winding. The air was thin and cold, and he had been carrying a heavy pack on his back since the very first day, a pack that seemed to grow heavier with each mile. One evening, as the sun was low and the shadows of the pines stretched long across the path, he arrived at a small temple at the edge of a forest. It was a simple place, just a few wooden buildings with a sloping roof and a bench out front facing the valley below. An old monk was sitting on the bench, watching the sunset, perfectly still. His hands rested in his lap. His face was calm and unhurried, the way a lake is calm when there is no wind. The traveler set down his pack with a groan and sat beside the monk. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just watched the sky turn from gold to pink to a deepening blue. Then the traveler said, "I am so tired. I have been carrying this pack for days and days, and I do not think I can go much further. My shoulders ache. My back is sore. Some mornings, I can barely stand up under the weight of it." The old monk looked at him with kind, curious eyes. "What is in the pack?" he asked. The traveler shrugged. "Everything I might need. Supplies for every kind of weather. Tools for every kind of problem. Things I have collected along the way that I thought might be useful someday." "May I look?" asked the monk. The traveler hesitated. The pack felt very personal, but there was something in the monk's voice, a gentleness, a total absence of judgment that made him feel it was safe. So he opened the pack, and together they went through it, item by item, in the fading light. And what the monk noticed was that much of what the traveler was carrying, he did not need. There were heavy coats for a climate he had already passed through long ago. Tools for problems that had already been solved. Stones he had picked up from riverbeds because they were beautiful, but that now just added weight. Maps of places he had already been, folded and refolded until the creases had worn through. And at the very bottom of the pack, wrapped carefully in cloth, was something the traveler had almost forgotten was there. It was a small mirror. "What is this for?" asked the monk. The traveler was quiet for a long moment. The last light of the day was disappearing behind the mountains. Then he said, softly, "I carry it to remind myself of all the ways I need to improve. I look into it each morning and see everything that is wrong with me, everything that needs to be fixed." The monk held the mirror gently, turning it over in his weathered hands. "And has it helped you improve?" he asked. The traveler thought about this. He thought about all the mornings he had looked into that mirror and felt the familiar sinking in his chest. All the days he had started already feeling behind, already feeling not enough. And he said, honestly, "No, it just makes me tired." The monk set the mirror down on the bench between them. "Perhaps," he said gently, "it is time to set that one down. You have been carrying it long enough." They sat together in silence for a while longer, watching the first stars appear above the mountains. And the traveler, for the first time in as long as he could remember, felt something loosen in his chest. Something soften. Not because anything had changed, but because, just for a moment, he was not carrying the weight of his own judgment. And that, it turned out, was the lightest he had felt in years. This is what the poet meant. This is what the old teachers have always meant. Love is here. It is closer than your next breath. It is the warmth in your chest when you hear a kind word. It is the softness that comes when you finally stop fighting yourself. It is the quiet, steady presence that remains when everything else falls away. And the barriers we have built against it, the blame, the judgment, the chronic sense that we are not enough, those barriers are not permanent. They are not who we are. They are habits. They are patterns. And like all patterns, they can soften over time when they are met with something warmer than criticism. They can be met with kindness. The Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love." This is the eternal rule. And we might hear that and think it is about how we treat others. And it is. But it is also, perhaps first, about how we treat ourselves. The hatred we carry toward our own flaws, our own stumbles, our own imperfect humanity, that too can only cease by love. So tonight, as you rest here, you might simply notice if there is any wall you have been building lately. Any place where you have been a little harsh with yourself, a little unforgiving, a little tight. And you do not need to knock it down. You do not need to do anything at all. You can simply notice it and let your noticing be gentle. Because gentleness, it turns out, is what dissolves walls. Not force, not effort, not even understanding. Just gentleness. The quiet, steady warmth of a heart that is willing to be kind. And in that kindness, love finds its way through. It always does. It has been waiting patiently on the other side of every wall you have ever built for just this moment. Let us pause here for a moment. Feel how you are feeling, just as you are. And when you are ready, we will gently continue together. Here is something curious about being human. Even when we can see clearly that something is hurting us, even when we can feel the weight of it in our chest and the ache of it in our days, we sometimes hold on to it anyway. Not because we enjoy the pain, but because somewhere deep inside we are afraid of what might happen if we let it go. This is especially true when it comes to being hard on ourselves. Most of us know, somewhere in our quieter moments, that the constant self-criticism is not making us happier. We know it is not making us kinder or more creative or more at ease. We can feel how it tightens us, how it narrows the world into a small, watchful, anxious space. And yet we keep doing it. We keep holding on to that inner voice that says we should be better, do more, try harder. We keep gripping the very thing that hurts. Why? Because we are afraid that if we let it go, we will fall apart. There is an old story about a man who was walking through the countryside when he slipped at the edge of a cliff. As he fell, he managed to grab hold of a small branch growing out of the rock face. And there he hung, high above the valley, his fingers wrapped tight around that branch, his knuckles white, his heart pounding. He hung there for a long time. His arms began to ache. His fingers grew numb. The wind blew cold against him. And still he held on, because below him was the unknown, and the branch, painful as it was to hold, was the only thing between him and the fall. After what felt like hours, a voice came to him, calm and clear, as though carried on the wind. It said, simply, "Let go." The man was terrified. "Let go?" He cried. "If I let go, I will fall. I will be lost." "Let go," the voice said again, with great gentleness. Not commanding, not impatient, just steady and warm. the way a trusted friend speaks when they can see something you cannot. And the man, too exhausted to hold on any longer, his fingers cramping, his arms shaking, finally opened his hands. And he fell about 2 feet, because the ground had been right beneath him the whole time. He had been hanging just a short distance above a wide, grassy ledge, safe and solid and perfectly capable of holding him. But he could not see it, because he had been so focused on holding on, so certain that letting go meant catastrophe, that he never once looked down. He lay there on the soft grass for a long while, breathing hard, feeling the solid earth beneath his back. And he began to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because of the sheer relief of it. All that effort, all that terror, all that pain in his hands and arms. And the ground had been right there, waiting patiently, the entire time. This is how it often is with self-blame. We grip it so tightly, convinced that it is the only thing keeping us from some terrible fall, some great unraveling. We are certain that without it, everything will come apart. And we cannot see that there is solid ground right beneath us. That something wiser and steadier than blame has been supporting us all along. That if we simply let go, we would land somewhere safe. Let us explore a story that shows how this plays out in everyday life. There was once a woman who worked as a leader in a large organization. She was known for her energy and her dedication. She arrived early each morning, often before the sun had fully risen, and she stayed late, her office light, one of the last to go dark in the building. She poured herself into everything she did, every project, every meeting, every decision. People around her admired her drive, her thoroughness, her ability to hold many things at once without dropping any of them. But what they did not see, what she kept carefully hidden beneath that polished surface, was a constant, grinding fear that she was not doing enough, that she was not smart enough or prepared enough, that she would be found out, that someone, someday, would look closely and see that beneath all that effort, she was not as capable as she appeared. And so she pushed harder. She prepared more than anyone else for every meeting, reading every document twice, sometimes 3 times. She checked her work again and again and again. She lay awake at night, going over conversations in her mind, rewinding them like a film, wondering if she had said the wrong thing at the wrong moment, wondering if people had noticed her uncertainty. It was exhausting. Some mornings she woke up already tired, already behind, already bracing herself for the day ahead. But the pushing worked, or so she believed. Because the striving, the endless self-correction, the constant inner pressure, it kept her sharp. It kept her on her toes. It kept her from slipping. Or did it? One evening, she was having a quiet conversation about this very thing, about the pressure she put on herself, and the person she was speaking with asked her a question she had never been asked before. What do you think would happen if you stopped being so hard on yourself? She answered immediately, without hesitation. I would get lazy, she said. I would stop caring. I would fall behind. Everything I have worked for would start to slip away. There was a pause. Then the other person asked, gently, has that ever actually happened? Have you ever had a period where you were gentler with yourself? And did you fall apart? She opened her mouth to answer yes. But then she stopped. Her face changed, softened, as though she was seeing something for the first time. Because the truth was, she could not think of a single time. The few moments in her life when she had felt at ease with herself, on a holiday perhaps, or during a rare quiet weekend, when the inner critic had gone quiet for a little while. Those moments had not led to laziness at all. They had led to some of her best work, her most creative thinking, her warmest, most genuine moments with the people she cared about. But the fear was louder than the evidence. The fear said, "Do not risk it. Keep pushing. Keep judging. It is the only way to stay safe." And so she held on to the branch. Does this sound familiar? It might, because this fear lives in almost all of us. This fear is something almost all of us carry, and it is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is one of the main reasons we stay stuck in patterns of self-blame, even when we can see, clearly, that they are hurting us. The fear whispers, "If I stop criticizing myself, I will not improve." It says, "If I accept myself as I am, I will stop trying." It says, "If I am kind to myself, I will become complacent, lazy, careless. I will let things slide. I will become someone I do not want to be." And this fear makes a kind of sense if you do not look at it too closely. After all, there is something motivating about dissatisfaction. There is something that feels productive about that anxious inner push, that relentless pressure to do better, be better, try harder. It feels like it is doing something useful. It feels like it matters. It feels like the engine that keeps the whole machine running. But here is what the old teachers understood, and what anyone who has ever experimented with genuine kindness toward themselves discovers sooner or later. Self-blame does not actually produce lasting growth. It produces tension. It produces rigidity. It produces a kind of brittle, anxious striving that looks productive on the outside but feels hollow and exhausting on the inside. It is like whipping a tired horse. You might get a little more speed for a moment, but you are not helping the horse. You are just wearing it out faster. Real growth, the kind that lasts, the kind that actually changes how we move through the world, that comes from a different place entirely. It comes from care, from curiosity, from the quiet inner voice that says, "I see what happened, and I would like to understand it, and I would like to try something different next time." Not from a place of fear, not from punishment, but from genuine warmth. The way a good teacher helps a student learn, not by shaming them for their errors, but by standing beside them with patience and encouragement, pointing gently toward what is possible. A great psychologist once made an observation that sounds so simple, it almost seems too easy. He said that it was not until he accepted himself just as he was that he became free to change. Think about that for a moment. Not that acceptance replaced the desire to grow, but that acceptance made growth possible. It cleared the ground. It removed the obstacle. It was the beginning, not the end. And many of the great spiritual teachers have said something similar in their own way. The Buddha taught that true transformation begins not with force or willpower, but with understanding, with seeing things clearly as they are, without the fog of judgment. See the truth of things, he said, and freedom follows. There is a teaching in Zen Buddhism about a finger pointing at the moon. The idea is simple. A teacher raises a finger and points at the moon, high and bright in the night sky. The student is supposed to look at the moon to see the thing the finger is pointing toward. But instead, the student stares at the finger. We do this with self-criticism. We think the criticism is the thing that matters, the finger. We think it is doing the important work. We stare at it, hold on to it, trust it. But the criticism is only a finger. What it is trying to point toward is the wish to grow, the wish to be kind, the wish to live well. That wish is the moon, and the moon does not need the finger. Your wish to be a good person, to live with integrity, to treat people well, to learn from your mistakes, that wish does not come from self-blame. It was there before the blame. It will be there after the blame. It is deeper and older and truer than any critic. The blame is just one way of pointing at it, and not a very good one. Because the more we stare at the finger, the more we lose sight of the moon. Let us sit with another story. There was once a woman who was raising a child on her own, and she loved this child more than she knew it was possible to love anything. She loved the sound of his laughter in the next room. She loved the way he reached for her hand without thinking about it as they walked down the street. She loved the sleepy warmth of him when she carried him to bed at night. But she was constantly afraid that she was not a good enough parent. Every evening, after her child had gone to sleep and the house was quiet, she would lie in bed and review the day. Not the good parts. Not the moments of laughter or tenderness. Not the story she had read him before bed, doing all the voices, making him giggle. Not the way he had looked at her over dinner and said, out of nowhere, "This is really good soup," as though it were the most important thing in the world. No, she reviewed the mistakes. The moment she had been too impatient when he was slow getting ready in the morning. The time she had raised her voice over something small, a spilled glass of milk, a shoe left in the hallway. The evening she had been so tired from work that when he had asked her to play, she had said, "Not now, maybe later," and later never came. And each mistake felt like proof that she was failing, proof that her child deserved someone better, someone more patient, more present, more together. Someone who never raised their voice and always had time to play and never ever said, "Not now." She carried this for years. It sat in her stomach like a cold stone, heavy and familiar. And the heaviest part of it was that she believed she needed to carry it. She believed that if she stopped criticizing herself, she would stop trying. That the criticism, painful as it was what kept her going. One evening, she was talking with an old friend over tea, someone she trusted deeply. The house was quiet. The child was asleep upstairs. And in the soft lamplight, she said something she had never said aloud before. "I am so afraid I am not good enough for him." Her friend set down her cup and looked at her for a long time. Not with pity, not with the kind of reassurance that brushes things aside, but with real seeing. And then her friend said, very simply, "The fact that you worry about it this much is the proof that you are not failing." The woman looked up. "What do you mean?" A parent who did not care would not lie awake at night going over every small moment. The worry itself comes from love. Do you see that? It is love, disguised as fear. You do not need the worry to keep the love going. The love was there first. It will be there whether you worry or not. Something shifted in her that evening. Not all at once. Not like a light switching on. More like a slow dawn, the way the sky brightens so gradually that you cannot point to the exact moment night became morning. But something that had been clenched for a very long time began, very gently, to open. Like a fist, slowly uncurling. She did not stop caring about how she parented. She did not become careless or lazy or distracted. If anything, she became more present. Because when the weight of self-blame lifted, even just a little, there was more room inside her. More room to notice her child. More room to laugh. More room to be right here, in this moment, instead of always turning back to look at yesterday's failures. The love had been there all along. It had never left. She just needed to stop confusing it with the blame. The Buddha told a story once about a woman in a village who was going through a very difficult time and came to him in desperation, asking for help. And the Buddha said, "Go to every house in the village and find one that has never known sorrow. Bring me something from that house and I will help you." And so she went, door to door, house to house, through the winding lanes of the village. At the first house, a kind woman answered and listened to her request. "I am sorry," she said gently. "We have known sorrow here. My mother was ill for many years." At the next house, an old man shook his head. "We have known sorrow too. We lost our harvest to a flood." And so it went, house after house, family after family. Each one welcomed her in, offered her tea, shared their story. And every story held its own weight, its own tenderness, its own particular shade of difficulty. She never found the house without sorrow. But in the searching, something happened that she did not expect. She realized she was not alone. Her struggle was not a punishment. It was not proof that something was wrong with her or that she had been singled out for suffering. It was simply part of being alive, part of the tender, vulnerable, beautiful experience of being human, of loving, of caring, of trying. And in that realization, there was a kind of peace. Not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of the belief that difficulty means you are failing. This is what we are really afraid of when we are afraid to let go of self-blame. We are afraid of our own humanness. We are afraid that being imperfect means being bad. We are afraid that if we stop punishing ourselves for our stumbles, the stumbles will define us. That without the constant correcting, we will lose ourselves. But we will not. We never do. What weighs us down is not the stumble itself. It is the heavy cloak of shame we wrap around it. And that shame, that tight, heavy, suffocating layer of blame, that is the part we can gently set down. There is a Zen saying that goes, "The obstacle is the path." And what it means, in its quiet way, is that the very thing we are struggling with is not a detour from our life. It is our life. It is the place where the growing happens, the rough ground where the roots go deep. Our impatience is not a sign that we are bad parents. It is the very place where we are learning patience. Our uncertainty at work is not proof that we are frauds. It is the edge of our learning, the frontier where we are stretching into something new, something we have not been before. Our restless minds during meditation are not evidence that we are doing it wrong. They are the meditation. And our self-blame itself, that old familiar habit of being hard on ourselves, that too is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that we care. Deep down, beneath all the harshness, there is a wish to live well, to love well, to do well. A wish that is so tender and so earnest that it sometimes disguises itself as harshness, because harshness feels safer than tenderness. Because tenderness asks us to be open, and openness feels like risk. But tonight, you do not need to take any risks. You are safe here. You are resting. And if you are willing, you might try letting just a little of that tenderness come through. Not as a project, not as something else to get right or to achieve, just as a quiet turning toward yourself, the way you might turn toward a child who is trying so hard and is so very tired. You might simply say, inwardly, with whatever sincerity you can find in this moment, you are doing your best. And your best is enough, because the ground is right beneath you. It has always been right beneath you. And if you let go of the branch, you will not fall. You will land gently, and you will find that your legs are strong enough to stand, and that the view from the solid ground is more beautiful than anything you could see while hanging on. Let us rest here for a moment. Just breathe. Just be. And when you are ready, we will continue on together. Imagine, if you will, a quiet morning. You wake up and something feels off. Not dramatically wrong. Nothing terrible has happened. There has been no bad news, no argument, no disaster. You simply wake up and there is a heaviness in you, a grayness, the kind of feeling that does not have a clear reason, that just seems to have arrived sometime in the night and settled into your body like fog settling into a valley. We all have mornings like this. Mornings where the body feels tired even after sleep, where the heart feels tender without knowing why, where the world outside the window looks the same as it always does, but somehow feels a little further away, a little less inviting. The coffee tastes the same. The light through the curtains is the same. But inside, something is off, and we cannot quite name it. And in that quiet, unguarded moment, before we are fully awake, before we have put on the day's armor, something happens inside. Something so fast and so familiar that we barely notice it, like a reflex. A thought arrives, and the thought says, "What is wrong with me?" Not, "I feel heavy this morning. I wonder what that is about." Not, "Something in me is tender right now. That is okay." But, "What is wrong with me? Why am I like this? I should not feel this way. Other people do not wake up feeling like this." And just like that, a difficult feeling becomes something worse. It becomes a judgment. And the judgment wraps itself around the feeling like a fist closing around a stone, and suddenly we are not just having a hard morning. We are a person who has hard mornings because there is something fundamentally wrong with us. The grey feeling is no longer just a feeling. It has become evidence of a flaw. This is what the Buddhist teachers call the second arrow. The Buddha once offered a teaching about this that is as clear and as useful today as it was thousands of years ago. He said it like this: when a person is struck by an arrow, it is painful. But if a second arrow strikes the same spot, the pain is far greater. The first arrow is what life brings us. The second arrow is what we add. The first arrow is the difficult feeling, the sadness, the anxiety, the frustration, the fatigue, the loneliness. These are simply part of being human. They come to everyone. No one has ever lived a life without them. They are like weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes grey, sometimes stormy, always changing. The second arrow is what happens next, inside our minds. It is the judgment we lay on top of the feeling. It is the story that says this feeling means something about who we are. It is the voice that takes a passing cloud and declares it a permanent flaw. "I feel anxious" becomes "I am a broken person." I feel sad becomes something is wrong with me. I feel angry becomes I am a bad person for feeling this way. The first arrow hurts. Of course it does. Difficult feelings are not pleasant. No one would choose them. But the second arrow, the one we aim at ourselves, that is the one that truly wounds. Because it takes something temporary and makes it feel permanent. It takes something human and makes it feel shameful. It takes a passing storm and locks us inside a windowless room. What is remarkable when you start to notice this is how quickly it happens. The gap between the first arrow and the second is almost invisible. It is like the gap between lightning and thunder when a storm is directly overhead. The flash and the sound seem to arrive at the same moment, as though they are one thing. But they are not. There is always a gap, however small. A wave of insecurity comes over you at a gathering, and before you can even name it, the thought is already there. Everyone can see that I do not belong here. A flush of irritation with someone you love, and instantly, I am too difficult. No wonder people pull away. A dip in energy at work, and I am falling behind. I am not cut out for this. Everyone else seems to manage just fine. A moment of forgetfulness, and what is wrong with my brain? A quiet evening at home, and everyone else has a more interesting life than this. A glance in the mirror, and when did I start looking so tired? The feeling comes, and the judgment follows so closely behind that they seem to be one thing. But they are not. They are two separate events. And that tiny, almost invisible space between them, that gap no wider than a breath, is where everything changes. That gap is where our freedom lives. Because the feeling, the first arrow, is not something we can control. Feelings arise the way the wind arises. They come from somewhere beyond our choosing, summoned by the body, by memory, by the weather of the nervous system. We do not decide to feel anxious any more than we decide when a cloud will pass in front of the sun. We do not choose our sadness or our irritation or our loneliness. They visit us. They arrive like guests at a door, uninvited but undeniable. The ancient Buddhist teachers were very clear about this, and it is one of the most liberating things they ever said. Feelings are natural. They are not mistakes. They are not character flaws. They are not evidence of failure. They are the mind and body responding to life, doing what they have always done, what they were built to do. Every human being who has ever lived has felt anger, fear, sadness, loneliness, confusion. Every single one. These feelings are part of the package. They come with the gift of being alive. But the second arrow is different. The second arrow is a habit. It is something we have practiced unknowingly so many thousands of times that it feels automatic, like breathing. It feels like it is just part of the feeling itself. But it is not. It is separate. It is added. It is learned. And what is learned can, with great patience and gentleness and time, be unlearned. Let us explore a story about how this works in the texture of everyday life. There was once a young teacher, just beginning his career, who loved his students very much. He had studied for years to prepare for this work. He had read and practiced and dreamed about the kind of teacher he wanted to be, the kind who truly made a difference, who helped young minds open like flowers in sunlight. And when he finally stood before his first class, in a small room with tall windows and desks arranged in rows, He felt a mixture of excitement and terror that took his breath away. The first few weeks went well. He found his rhythm, the way a musician finds a groove. The students responded to his warmth and his enthusiasm. He could feel something happening in the room, a kind of aliveness, a current of connection between himself and these young people. He went home each evening tired but glowing. He felt, for perhaps the first time in his life, that he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. But then came a difficult day, a lesson that did not go as planned. He had prepared carefully the night before, going over his notes, thinking about how to explain a difficult idea in a way that would land. But when the hour began, something was off. The students were restless. The material was too advanced, or perhaps he had not explained it clearly enough. Somewhere in the middle of the hour, he could feel it slipping away from him, like sand running through his fingers. The room grew noisy. Students looked out the window at the sky. One young girl in the back row put her head down on her desk, and the first arrow struck. He felt a sharp pang of disappointment, a sinking in his stomach, a flush of heat across his face. This is the natural response of a caring person when something they have worked hard on does not go the way they hoped. It is a first arrow. It hurts. It is real. But it passes, the way a wave rises and falls and returns to the sea. Except that for this young teacher, it did not pass. Because before the wave could recede, before he could even take a full breath, the second arrow arrived. "I am terrible at this," the thought said, with quiet authority. "I have no business being in front of a classroom. Those students can see right through me. I have made a huge mistake choosing this path." And then another arrow, swift on the heels of the last. The other teachers on this floor would have handled this so much better. They have a natural authority that I just do not have. And another. My students are going to fall behind because of me. I am letting them down. And another. I should have known this would happen. I was never good enough for this. By the time the final bell rang and the students filed out, what had been one difficult hour, one single lesson that did not land, had become an entire story about who he was. Not, I had a rough lesson today, but I am a failure. Not, that hour did not work, but I do not work. The first arrow had become a dozen second arrows, and he carried them home with him like a quiver full of thorns, and they kept him awake that night, and they followed him into the next morning, and the morning after that. Here is what is so tender about this, and what is so worth understanding. The second arrows do not come from meanness. They do not come from cruelty or malice. They come from caring. This young teacher was hard on himself because he cared so deeply about his students. He wanted so much to reach them, to help them, to be the kind of teacher that makes a difference. And when that caring met a moment of disappointment, his mind did the only thing it knew how to do. It turned the caring into blame. This is something we all do. The mother who lies awake at night, judging herself for losing her patience, does it because she loves her child with a fierceness that sometimes frightens her. The person who is hard on themselves about their health or their habits is doing it because they want to be well, because they want to be present and alive for the people who need them. The friend who replays a conversation over and over, cringing at something they said, does it because they care about the connection, because the friendship matters. The caring is beautiful. It is, in many ways, the best part of us. It is the part that reaches toward others, that wants to do right, that feels the sting of falling short, precisely because the thing we fell short of mattered so much. But somewhere along the way, we learned to confuse caring with blame. We came to believe that they were the same thing, that punishing ourselves for mistakes was the same as caring about doing better, that beating ourselves up was a form of responsibility. But they are not the same. They have never been the same. Caring is the first arrow, noticing, feeling the disappointment, wishing things had gone differently, wanting to try again. Blame is the second arrow, and the second arrow does not help us care more. It does not make us more thoughtful or more capable or more present. It just makes the wound deeper. It just makes the load heavier. It just makes it harder to try again. The Buddha put it this way: you yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. And this is not a sweet sentiment to put on a wall and forget about. It is a teaching about the second arrow. It is saying, when you feel pain, do not add more pain. When you feel the sting of falling short, do not aim another arrow at the wound. Turn toward yourself with the same tenderness, the same patience, the same quiet compassion that you would offer anyone you love. There is an old parable about a person who goes to a wise elder and says, I have two wolves inside me. One is kind and gentle and patient. The other is harsh and full of blame and always afraid. They are always fighting. Which one will win? And the elder says, simply, the one you feed. This is not about willpower. It is not about forcing yourself to be positive or pushing away every difficult thought. It is much gentler than that. It is about noticing, in those small, quiet moments throughout the day, which wolf you are feeding. Every time we notice a difficult feeling and pile judgment on top of it, we are feeding the wolf of blame. We are giving it another meal, making it stronger, making its voice louder. And every time we catch that moment, that tiny gap between the feeling and the story, and choose something gentler, even just a breath, even just a softening, we are feeding the wolf of kindness. We are making space for something warmer. And this is not about perfection. It is not about never having a second arrow again. That would just be another impossible standard, another thing to fail at, another reason to judge ourselves. It is about noticing, over time, with patience, with humor even, that the second arrow is not necessary, that the feeling can be felt without the judgment, that the cloud can pass without us declaring it permanent weather. There is a beautiful Zen teaching that compares the mind to a vast open sky. Thoughts and feelings are clouds that pass through it. Some are light and wispy, barely there, gone before you can name them. Some are dark and heavy and seem to fill the entire sky from one horizon to the other. But the sky itself is never damaged by the clouds. No matter how dark the storm, no matter how thick the fog, the sky remains as it always was, wide and open and boundless. It does not judge the clouds. It does not try to push them away or cling to the ones it likes. It simply holds them all, makes room for them all, and lets them move at their own pace. You are that sky. Your feelings, even the difficult ones, even the first arrows, they are clouds. They come, they stay for a while, and they pass. And the second arrows, the judgments, the blame, the harsh stories you tell yourself, those are also clouds. They too can pass. They too can thin and dissolve. especially when we stop grabbing hold of them and insisting that they are the truth about who we are. Let us return, for a moment, to that quiet morning we imagined at the beginning. You wake up. Something feels heavy, grey, off. There is no reason for it. It is just there, the way weather is just there. And instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" you simply notice, "Oh, this is here. This heaviness, this grey feeling. Hello, old friend." Not fighting it, not fixing it, not spinning a story about what it means or what it says about you. Just noticing, the way you might notice rain against the window on a still afternoon. Ah, rain today. That is all right. And then, gently, perhaps with a hand on your heart or a softening in your shoulders, you might say to yourself, "This is a first arrow. It is a feeling. It will move in its own time, at its own pace. I do not need to add a second arrow. I can just be here with this, just as it is." And perhaps, in that small and quiet act of noticing without judging, something softens. The heaviness does not disappear. It does not need to disappear. But the tightness around it loosens, the way ice loosens at the edges when spring comes. The fist around the stone relaxes, just a little. And you find that you can carry the feeling without being crushed by it, because you are no longer adding the weight of blame on top. This is what the teachers have always pointed toward. Not a life without arrows. Not a life without difficulty or sadness or frustration or confusion. That life does not exist, not for anyone, not anywhere. What they point toward is a life where we stop adding the second arrow, where we stop aiming at ourselves, where we stop punishing ourselves for being human. There is a line from the Buddhist tradition that says, "Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional." And the optional part, the part we actually have some gentle choice about, is almost always the second arrow. It is almost always the judgment, the blame, the story that says this feeling means something is permanently wrong with me. But nothing is permanently wrong with you. You have never been broken. You are a human being, feeling human feelings, in a world that is sometimes difficult and sometimes beautiful, and almost always both at the same time. And that is not a flaw. That is not a weakness. That is just what it feels like to be alive. To have a heart that is open enough to feel things. To care enough to notice when something hurts. That caring, that tenderness, that is not the problem. It is the gift. So tonight, as you rest, you might let the arrows of the day fall away. The first arrows, the ones that came unbidden, the moments of sadness or frustration or fatigue, let them land softly and then let them lie still. They have done their work. They have told you what they needed to tell you. And the second arrows, the ones you aimed at yourself, the judgments, the blame, the stories of not enoughness, let those fall away too. They were never needed. They were never true. They were just old habits, doing what old habits do. And they can rest now, alongside you, as the evening settles in. You are the sky, wide and clear and vast. And the clouds are passing, as they always do, as they always will. Let us pause here. Let the breath come and go, easy and unhurried. And when you are ready, we will walk on together. Two friends were sitting together one afternoon, the kind of easy, unhurried conversation that only happens when there is nowhere else to be and nothing that needs to be done. They were in a small kitchen, the late afternoon light falling warm and golden across the table between them. They had known each other a long time, through seasons of happiness and seasons of struggle, through moves and changes, and the slow, quiet deepening that comes from showing up for each other year after year. There was a trust between them that allowed the truth to come out simply, without decoration. One of them said something that day that changed the other's life. It was not delivered as advice. It was not a grand pronouncement. She simply said, in the middle of talking about something else, "I have been learning how to be my own best friend." It was such a simple thing to say. Just a handful of words, spoken casually over a cup of tea. But the one who heard it felt something shift inside, the way the ground shifts beneath your feet when you suddenly see something that was always there but hidden in plain sight. Because in that moment, hearing those words, she realized something about herself that she had never quite put into focus before. She was not her own best friend. She was something closer to the opposite. She was, in fact, her own harshest critic, her own most demanding judge, the one voice in her entire life that never softened, never relented, never took a day off, never once said, "You know what? You are doing just fine. I am proud of you." She thought about how she spoke to herself when she made a mistake. She thought about the running commentary in her head, the one that accompanied her through every day like a shadow. It was not a friendly voice. It was not the voice of someone who wished her well. It was the voice of someone who was always watching, always measuring, always finding her a little bit short of the mark. And once she saw it, she could not unsee it. It was everywhere, in every corner of her life. This is how it often begins, not with a grand revelation or a bolt of lightning, but with a quiet sentence from someone we trust that opens a door we did not know was closed. And behind that door is a landscape we have been living in our entire lives without recognizing it for what it was. She began to pay attention, and what she found startled her. She noticed the voice that showed up each morning before she even got out of bed, already listing what she needed to do, already reminding her of what she had not done. She noticed how she spoke to herself after a difficult conversation, replaying it over and over, always casting herself as the one who had said the wrong thing. She noticed the way she looked at herself in photographs, how her eye went immediately to what was wrong, never to what was alive and shining. She noticed how she compared herself to her friends, to her colleagues, to people she barely knew, and how the comparison almost always ended the same way. With her at the bottom, with her as the one who was not quite enough. And she noticed something else, something that surprised her. She would never speak to another person the way she spoke to herself. If a friend came to her in tears, saying, "I feel like I am failing at everything," she would wrap her arms around that friend and say, "You are not failing. You are doing your best in a difficult time, and your best is beautiful." She would mean it, too. Every word. But when she felt the same things, when she was the one struggling, the voice inside said something very different. It said, "Try harder. Do better. What is wrong with you?" There was a gentleness she offered freely to everyone around her, and a harshness she reserved entirely for herself. The Buddha once said, "If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete." There is so much in those few words, because most of us think of compassion as something we give to others. We think of it as an outward movement, a reaching towards someone who is struggling, a kindness offered to a world in need. And it is all of those things. But the Buddha was saying something more. He was saying that the circle of our care has to include the one who is closest, the one who is always here, the one we wake up with every morning and go to sleep with every night. Ourselves. And not in a selfish way. Not in the way that puts ourselves first at the expense of others, but in the way that a gardener waters the roots of a tree, knowing that healthy roots are what allow the branches to reach outward, to bear fruit, to offer shade. If the roots are dry, the whole tree suffers. If we are harsh with ourselves, that harshness leaks into everything, into our patience, our creativity, our ability to truly be present for the people we love. And if we are gentle with ourselves, that gentleness becomes available to everyone around us. Let us explore a story about what happens when we begin to see this pattern clearly. There was once a person who had spent many years studying and practicing meditation. They had attended long retreats in quiet places, sitting for hours in stillness, learning to watch the breath, learning to notice the movements of the mind without getting swept away by them. And during those retreats, especially the longer ones, something extraordinary would happen. The usual noise of the mind would begin to quiet. Not all at once, but gradually, like the surface of a lake, growing still as the wind dies down. The constant planning and worrying and evaluating would soften, would lose its urgency, until it was just a murmur in the background, and then barely that. And in that stillness, a warmth would arise. A sense of openness and connection that was almost overwhelming in its tenderness. It felt like coming home, like stepping through a door into a room you had always known was there, but could never quite find. The heart felt wide and spacious, as though it could hold everything, every person, every sorrow, every joy. There was no separation, no walls, just warmth, extending in every direction. During these times, the world looked different. Everything seemed luminous, lit from within. The faces of strangers were beautiful. The sound of wind in the trees was enough to bring tears. A simple meal of rice and vegetables tasted like a gift. There was a feeling of being part of something vast and kind, of belonging to life in a way that was beyond words, beyond understanding, beyond anything the mind could capture or keep. And then the retreat would end, and they would go home. And slowly, over the days that followed, the luminous feeling would begin to fade. Like a tide going out, so gradually you could not point to the moment it turned. The old habits would return, one by one, like familiar guests reclaiming their seats at the table. The self-preoccupation, the small irritabilities, the familiar tightness of worry and wanting. The world would shrink back to its usual size, and they would shrink with it. And the wide, warm, boundless feeling would become a memory, beautiful but distant, like a dream you cannot quite hold on to after waking. This had happened many times before. It was, in a way, a familiar rhythm. Open and close, expand and contract. But on one particular occasion, the contrast was especially sharp. They had come home from a long period of practice feeling truly open, truly connected, genuinely at peace with themselves and the world. And within just a few days, they could feel themselves contracting, becoming small again, caught up once more in their own concerns, their own comfort, their own little world of me and mine. And this time, instead of just feeling vaguely disappointed and waiting for the feeling to pass, they really looked at it. They sat with it, the way you might sit beside a stream and simply watch the water. They asked themselves, honestly, without judgment, what is happening here? And what they saw was this. They were watching themselves, being self-centered, watching the mind do what minds do, which is to orbit endlessly around the self. My needs, my worries, my plans, my comfort, my fears. It was so constant, so automatic, so deeply woven into every moment, that it was almost funny. Almost. Except that it also hurt to see. And then, right on cue, the second arrow arrived. The judgment. You are selfish. After all this practice, all this meditation, all these years, and you are still this self-centered. What is wrong with you? But here is where the story turns, and it turns towards something healing. Because as they sat with this judgment, something else became clear. Something quieter and truer than the blame. And it was this: they could not help it. The self-centeredness was not a choice. It was not something they had signed up for or decided to have. It was simply the way the human mind works. It is how we are wired. Our awareness naturally orbits around the self, the way planets orbit around a sun. Not because we are bad, not because we have failed, but because this is how the mind was built over millions and millions of years to keep us alive, to keep track of threats, to plan for survival, to make sure we have enough. It is not a flaw. It is the design. And once they saw that, really saw it, something opened. Not a door of joy or triumph, but a door of tenderness. A sadness came, but it was a clean sadness, a compassionate one. The sadness of seeing how many moments of their life they had taken this natural, unavoidable self-centeredness and turned it into evidence against themselves. How many times they had felt a wave of selfishness or pettiness or impatience and immediately concluded, I am a bad person. They could see the whole landscape of it. Years and years of small moments, each one carrying that same quiet verdict. Not enough. Not kind enough. Not generous enough. Not awake enough. And none of it was necessary. None of the judgment. None of the blame. The self-centeredness was going to be there whether they judged it or not. But the judgment, that was optional. And it was the judgment that had been causing the real suffering all along. They sat there for a long time, letting the sadness move through them, not pushing it away, not analyzing it, just letting it be there, like rain falling on a garden. And something that had been clenched for a very long time, something hard and tight and defended, began to soften. It was a grief, in a way. A gentle, necessary grief for all the moments spent at war with themselves when they could have been at peace. All the moments of warmth that were missed because they were too busy judging themselves for not being warm enough. And in that grief, something beautiful happened. The grief itself was a form of kindness. By allowing themselves to feel sad about how they had treated themselves, they were, for the first time, truly being on their own side. They were saying, in effect, you did not deserve all that harshness. And I am sorry. It was not a dramatic moment. There were no fireworks, no bolts of insight, no trumpets. Just a quiet softening, a turning toward themselves with tenderness instead of blame. And from that softening, a commitment began to form, not a rigid, teeth-gritting kind of commitment, but a warm one. A dedication to noticing the pattern of self-blame and, each time, choosing something gentler. each time feeding the kinder wolf. Not perfectly, not always, but again and again and again, with patience. And this is the quiet truth of it. This kind of change does not happen in a single moment. It happens in thousands of small moments. Each time you notice you are being hard on yourself and choose, even slightly, to soften. Each time you catch the judgment, and instead of following it down the old familiar road, you pause, you breathe, and you offer yourself something warmer. Each of those moments is a small turning. And together, over time, they add up to something that feels like freedom. There is an old Zen story about a monk who went to his teacher and said, "I have been meditating for many years, but I still get angry. I still get jealous. I still get afraid. What am I doing wrong?" The teacher looked at him and said, "Nothing. You are doing nothing wrong. The waves still come. They will always come. But have you noticed that you are no longer drowning in them?" The monk thought about this, and he realized it was true. The feeling still arose, as strong as ever, but something in him had changed. There was a little more space around the feelings now, a little more room to breathe. He was no longer pulled under every time a wave came. He could watch it rise and feel it and let it pass without losing himself entirely. That space, the teacher said, is who you really are. Not the waves, the ocean. This is what begins to happen when we stop turning against ourselves. We do not get rid of the difficult feelings. We do not become saints or sages who float above the mess of human life. The mess continues. The selfishness continues. The impatience and the pettiness and the wanting continue. But we stop adding that extra layer of blame. And in the space that opens up, something beautiful becomes possible. We start to see the ocean. A wise psychologist once said something that sounds almost too simple to be true. He said, "It was not until I accepted myself just as I was that I was free to change." Think about how strange and how beautiful that is. We spend so much of our lives trying to change by force, by willpower, by judgment, by whipping ourselves into shape. And it does not work. It never really works. It just makes us tired and tight and afraid. But acceptance, real acceptance, the kind that says, "This is how it is right now, and I am not going to fight it," that is what opens the door. Not because acceptance means giving up, but because acceptance means putting down the weapon. And when you put down the weapon, your hands are free. Free to build, free to reach, free to hold. This is what that person discovered when they came home from their retreat and watched themselves contract. The contraction was not the enemy. The self-centeredness was not the enemy. The only enemy was the belief that these things made them unworthy of their own kindness. And when that belief softened, even a little, everything changed. Not the circumstances, not the feelings, but the relationship to it all. The way they held it, the way they carried it. Like the difference between holding a stone in a clenched fist and holding it in an open palm. The stone is the same, but the experience of holding it is completely different. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a practice of widening circles of compassion. You begin by sending kindness inward to yourself, and then you widen the circle to include the people closest to you, and then wider still to include acquaintances, strangers, even people you find difficult. and then wider still, until the circle includes all living beings. But the center of the circle matters. If the center is hollow, if we have skipped over ourselves in our rush to be kind to others, the whole thing wobbles. It has no foundation. We end up offering a kindness to the world that we are unwilling to offer to ourselves. And that imbalance shows up everywhere. In our exhaustion, our resentment, our quiet sense of depletion. The center of the circle is you. Not in a selfish way. In a foundational way. The way the roots of a tree are the foundation for everything that grows above. You cannot pour from an empty cup, as the old saying goes. But it is more than that. You cannot truly love others with an open heart while your own heart is under siege. The kindness has to begin at home. It has to begin here, with this breath, with this body, with this imperfect, striving, beautiful human life that you are living right now. So what does it look like, this learning to be your own friend? It does not look like anything dramatic. It does not require a retreat or a special practice or a sudden transformation. It is much simpler than that and much closer. It is available to you right now, right here, in this very breath. It looks like catching yourself in a moment of self-criticism and pausing just for a breath. Not stopping the criticism necessarily. You cannot always do that, and trying to stop your thoughts is just another way of fighting yourself. Just noticing it. Oh, there it is again. I am being hard on myself. That noticing, that simple recognition, by itself, is an act of friendship. Because a friend pays attention. A friend notices when you are hurting, even when you are the one doing the hurting. It looks like asking, in those moments, a single, gentle question. How am I treating myself right now? And not to judge the answer. Not to fix anything. Just to see it clearly. Just to bring it above the surface, into the light where it can be seen for what it is. It looks like placing a hand on your own heart, the way you might place a hand on a friend's shoulder when they are going through something difficult, and saying, even silently, even imperfectly, this is hard right now, and you are doing okay. You really are. It looks like the willingness, practiced over and over, gently and imperfectly, to be as patient with yourself as you would be with someone you dearly love. To give yourself the same benefit of the doubt, the same warmth, the same forgiveness. The Buddha said, you can search the entire world and not find a single being more worthy of love and compassion than yourself. And perhaps, lying here tonight, you can let those words land softly, not as an instruction, not as something else to achieve, but as a permission, a gentle, ancient permission to turn the kindness inward. To be, at last, your own dear friend. Let us pause for a moment here. Notice how you feel. And when you are ready, we will continue on together. Sometimes the most important change in our life begins with the smallest agreement. A quiet yes spoken to ourselves. A willingness to try something different, even when we are not sure it will work. Even when everything in us says, but what if it does not? The old Zen teachers had a saying, leap and the net will appear. It is not a promise that things will be easy. It is a reminder that sometimes the only way to discover what is waiting for us is to stop holding back and allow ourselves to fall into something new. Tonight, as we move deeper into this quiet evening together, let us explore what it looks like when someone makes that leap, when they say yes to treating themselves differently, even just for a little while, and discover that on the other side of their fear is something they did not expect. Something gentle, something warm, something that was waiting for them all along. Let us explore a story about a young woman who had just finished her training as a healer, a counselor, someone whose job it was to sit with people in their pain and help them find their way through. She had studied for many years. She had read books and attended lectures and practiced under the guidance of experienced teachers. She was bright and thoughtful and deeply empathic, the kind of person who could feel what others were feeling almost before they said a word. And she was terrified, not of the work itself. She loved the work. She loved sitting across from someone and creating a safe space where they could finally let down their guard and be honest about what was happening inside. She loved the moments of connection, the times when something shifted in the room and a person's eyes would soften and they would say, "I have never told anyone that before." What terrified her was herself. She was convinced, deeply and thoroughly convinced, that she was not good enough to do this work, that she was pretending, that she had somehow slipped through the cracks of her training and ended up in a chair she did not deserve to sit in. It was as though everyone else had received some secret manual on how to be a real healer, and hers had been lost in the mail. She looked at the other counselors around her, the ones who had been doing this for years, and she saw confidence. She saw steadiness. She saw people who seemed to know exactly what they were doing, who spoke with quiet authority, who never seemed to second-guess themselves the way she did. And then she looked at herself and saw doubt, uncertainty. A young woman sitting in a big chair, hoping no one would notice that her hands were trembling. The voice in her head was constant. "They are going to find out. Your clients deserve someone better. You are going to say the wrong thing and make everything worse. And then everyone will know what you already know, that you do not belong here." It was not just a passing worry. It was a hum that ran beneath everything she did, steady and relentless, like a low note on an organ that never stops vibrating. It showed up first thing in the morning when she was preparing for the day, making her go over her notes again and again and again. It showed up during sessions, sitting on her shoulder like a crow, making her second-guess her instincts just when she needed to trust them most. It showed up after sessions, making her replay every word she had said, every silence that lasted a beat too long, every moment where she felt uncertain, searching for evidence that she had failed. And it showed up at night, when the house was quiet, and there was nothing left to distract her from the simple, frightening thought, "I am not enough for this. I may never be enough for this." The thing about this feeling, this sense of not being enough, is that it never stays in one place. It is like water. It finds every crack, every low spot, every vulnerable corner of our lives, and it seeps in. For this young woman, it was not just about her work. It was about her relationships. She worried she was not a good enough partner, not attentive enough, not loving enough. It was about her body, the familiar dissatisfaction with how she looked, what she ate, whether she was taking care of herself properly. It was about the future. She wanted very much to be a mother someday, and the voice said, "How can you take care of a child when you can barely take care of yourself?" It was everywhere, and it was exhausting. One day, she sat down with a trusted teacher, someone she had been learning from for some time. They were in a small, quiet room with soft light and two comfortable chairs facing each other. It was the kind of room where the truth tends to come out, because there is nothing to hide behind. And she said, with the kind of honesty that only comes when you are truly tired of pretending. I do not know how to stop being so hard on myself. I know it is not helping. I can see clearly that it is making everything worse. It is making me more anxious, not less. It is making me more rigid, not more responsive. It is making me less present with my clients, not more. I can see all of this, but I do not know another way. I have been doing this my whole life. Her teacher listened carefully, with the same kind of deep attention she was learning to offer her own clients. And then the teacher asked, "What are you afraid would happen if you were kind to yourself? If you treated yourself the way you treat the people who come to you for help?" She thought about this for a long time. The room was quiet. A clock ticked softly on the wall. And then she said what so many of us would say, what we explored earlier in our time together tonight. She said, "I am afraid I would stop improving. I am afraid that the harshness is the only thing keeping me sharp. That without it, I would fall apart." Her teacher smiled, not dismissively, warmly, the way you smile at something you recognize, something you have felt yourself, something that is painful but also, in its way, very human. Would you be willing to try an experiment? The teacher said, "For 1 month, just 1 month, what if, every time you noticed yourself being harsh with yourself, you simply paused and turned toward that place inside with kindness instead? Not forcing anything, not pretending to feel something you do not feel, just turning toward yourself the way you would turn toward a dear friend who was struggling, just to see what happens." The young woman hesitated. A month felt like a long time to go without the familiar voice of self-correction. It felt like stepping off a ledge, like letting go of the branch. "And if things get worse?" she asked. "If I become careless, if my work suffers, then you can go right back to judging yourself," the teacher said gently. "I promise the judgment will still be there if you want it. It is not going anywhere." That made her laugh. It was a small laugh, surprised and genuine, and the laugh was enough to crack the door open, just a sliver. She said yes. What her teacher guided her toward was something very simple, not a complicated technique, not a philosophy to memorize or a set of rules to follow, just a way of turning toward herself when the harshness arose instead of turning away. It went something like this. When she noticed the familiar tightening, the voice saying, "You are not enough," or "You should have done better," or "Everyone else is more capable than you," she would pause. Just for a moment, just long enough to notice what was happening, to recognize it. Here it is again, the old pattern. And instead of running from it, or arguing with it, or trying to fix it, she would simply let it be there. She would allow the feelings to exist without immediately trying to change them. The tightness in her chest, the sinking in her stomach, the heat in her face. She would just let them be, the way you might let a rainstorm simply be, without rushing to close every window. And then, gently, she would turn her attention inward and ask, "What is underneath this?" Not in a clinical way, not analyzing, just feeling. And usually, beneath the harsh voice, beneath the judgment and the striving, there was something much simpler and much more tender. Fear, sadness, loneliness. A young part of her that just wanted to be told that she was okay. And when she found that tender place, she would do something that felt strange at first, but grew more natural with time. She would offer it kindness. She would put her hand on her arm or on her heart, and she would speak to that part of herself the way she would speak to a frightened child. It is okay. You are okay. You do not have to be perfect. You just have to be here. More than the words, it was the intention behind them that mattered. The sincere wish to be gentle with herself. The decision, made again and again, to respond to her own pain with warmth instead of criticism. She did this for a month. And if you are imagining a smooth, graceful arc from self-criticism to self-love, it was not like that at all. It was messy. It was uneven. Some days the kindness came easily, like a warm breeze finding its way through an open window. She would notice the harsh voice, pause, turn inward, find the tender place, and offer it warmth, and something would soften, and she would feel, for a few minutes or an hour, a kind of peace she had not known before. Other days it felt like speaking into an empty room. The words were there. You are okay. You are enough. But they felt hollow, like reading lines from a script she did not believe. The old habits were too strong, the grooves too deep, and the harsh voice would run unchecked for hours before she even noticed it was there. On those days, she would sometimes catch it only at night, lying in bed, and think, I forgot again. I spent the whole day beating myself up and I did not even notice. And then, on those nights, the voice would try to turn even that into blame. You cannot even do the kindness practice right. What is wrong with you? But she had been warned about this. Her teacher had told her, gently, that the practice is not about doing it perfectly. It is about doing it again, and again, and again. Each time you notice, each time you pause, each time you choose warmth over harshness, even clumsily, even half-heartedly, something is shifting. Something beneath the surface, too subtle to see, is slowly, quietly rearranging itself. So she kept going. Not perfectly, not gracefully, just persistently. The way a river keeps going, not because it has a plan, but because that is what rivers do. And something began to shift. It was subtle at first. A moment here, a moment there, where the tightness in her chest would ease and she would feel, briefly, unexpectedly, a warmth that she had not felt before. A warmth that was not coming from outside, not from a compliment or an achievement or someone else's approval, but from inside. From herself. As if somewhere deep within, a small fire had been lit that she did not know she was capable of lighting. And then, gradually, the moments grew longer. The space between the harsh voice and her response grew wider, like a gap in the clouds, slowly opening to let the sun through. She started to catch the pattern earlier, to notice the tightening before it became a full storm. And she found, to her genuine surprise, that the kindness was not making her complacent. It was not making her lazy or sloppy or careless. It was making her braver. She started to trust her instincts more in sessions with her clients. She allowed herself to say things she had been too afraid to say, to follow hunches, to sit in silence when silence was what was needed, rather than rushing to fill it with words. She started to try things she had been too afraid to try, not because the fear was gone, but because she was no longer adding judgment on top of the fear. The fear was just fear. It was weather, and she could feel it without being destroyed by it. She became warmer, more present, more spontaneous, more herself. And here was the most astonishing thing. the very qualities she had been trying so hard to manufacture through self-criticism, the confidence, the steadiness, the genuine warmth, were now arising naturally, on their own, because there was finally room for them. The constant pressure of not enough had been taking up so much space inside her that there was no room left for her own goodness to come through. And when the pressure eased, even a little, the goodness was right there, like sunlight pouring through a window that had finally been unshuttered. It had always been right there. She had just never let it in. At the end of the month, she sat with her teacher again, and her teacher asked, "How has it been?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I think you tricked me." "How so?" "Because a month is not enough. This is not a month-long thing. This is a life thing." Her teacher smiled. "Yes, it is. But," she said, and there was something new in her voice, something lighter, something that had not been there before. "I think the commitment itself is what is changing things. Not that I am doing it perfectly, just that I keep choosing it. I keep turning toward myself instead of against myself. And that is letting me feel like I could actually love my life." And then her teacher asked one more question. "If you really trusted who you are, deep down, beneath all the doubt and the judgment, who would you be?" She opened her eyes, and there was a twinkle in them, a brightness, the look of someone who has glimpsed something precious and knows it is real. "I would be a really good mother," she said. And what was so beautiful about that answer was that she was already being one. She was mothering herself. She was learning to hold herself the way a good mother holds a child, with patience, with warmth, with the steady reassurance that says, "You are okay. You are safe. I am here." And that is what kindness does. When we learn to offer it to ourselves, we become a source of it for everyone around us. Not a strained, effortful kindness that comes from obligation, but a natural, overflowing kindness that comes from fullness. The way a spring gives water, not because it tries, but because it is full. A poet once wrote words that seem to speak directly to this, to all of us who hold back from our own lives because we believe we are not ready. She wrote about the moment of choosing to step through the door, even when we feel unworthy, even when our motives are not pure, even when we are afraid, even when every voice inside says, "Not yet, not you, not now." She asked, gently, "Why do we wait? Why do we hold back from our own awakening? Why do we stand at the threshold and refuse to cross? Is it because we believe we are not ready, not good enough, not whole enough, not healed enough?" And then she said something that cuts through every excuse, every hesitation, every carefully constructed reason we give for staying small and staying safe. She said that perfection is not a requirement for anything except pain, that the stories we tell ourselves about our separation and our failure are just that, stories, and that the only moment we have to be whole is this one, right now, not when we have fixed ourselves, not when we have earned it, not when we have become the polished, shining version of ourselves that exists only in our imagination. Now, just as we are, with everything we carry, now is the moment. This is the day. These words are not about striving. They are not about trying harder. They are about the deepest kind of permission. Permission to stop waiting for a version of yourself that does not exist. and will never exist, because the whole point is that you do not need it. Permission to be here, fully, just as you are, with all your tender imperfections, your unfinished edges, your messy humanity, and to know that this is enough, that you are enough, that you have always been enough. The old Zen teachers called this your original face, the face you had before you learned to be afraid of it, before the judgments piled up like snow, before the walls were built, before you learned what you were supposed to look like and spent all your energy trying to match it. Your original face is still there. It has always been there, beneath the layers, patient and luminous and whole, like the moon behind the clouds on a winter night. You cannot see it, perhaps, but it is shining. It has never stopped shining. And tonight, as you rest here in the quiet, you do not need to find it. You do not need to uncover it, or earn it, or work toward it. You can simply allow the possibility that it is already here, that the goodness you have been searching for, the wholeness you have been chasing, the love you have been trying to earn, is not somewhere out ahead of you on a road you have not yet traveled. It is right here, in this breath, in this body, in this moment, which is the only moment there has ever been. It has been raining gently all evening, this soft, quiet rain of awareness and kindness, and the garden of your heart has been receiving it, whether you noticed or not. The soil is softer now. The seeds that were always there, seeds of compassion, of warmth, of a deep and steady love for this life and everyone in it, including you, those seeds are beginning to stir. And in their own time, in their own way, in a way that you do not need to control or direct or worry about, they will bloom. You do not need to make them bloom. You just need to let the rain fall. And it is falling, gently, right now. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel the quiet. Feel how far we have come together this evening. And when you are ready, we will close gently together. There is a story told in the Zen tradition about a teacher who gathered her students one evening under a wide, clear sky. The moon was full and bright, hanging low over the mountains, so close it seemed you could reach out and touch it. The teacher pointed up at the moon and said, "What do you see?" One student said, "I see a moon that is perfectly round." Another said, "I see a moon that is bright and beautiful." A third said, "I see light." The teacher nodded. Then she said, "Now look at the surface. What do you see there?" The students looked more carefully, and they began to notice what they had overlooked at first. The moon was not smooth. It was covered in shadows and textures, dark patches and pale craters, rough places and uneven edges. Up close, it was full of what you might call imperfections. And yet, the teacher said softly, it is still the whole of the moon. Every shadow, every crater, every rough and uneven place is part of what makes it the moon. Take any of it away, and it would not be the moon anymore. It would be something less. She paused, and the student sat in silence, looking up. "You are like this," she said. "Your rough places, your shadows, the parts of yourself you wish were different, they are not separate from your beauty. They are part of it. You are already the whole of the moon." We have traveled a long way together this evening, you and I, through kitchen stories and mountain temples, through gardens with too many walls and travelers carrying packs that were too heavy, through first arrows and second arrows, through impossible standards and the quiet grief of seeing how long we have been at war with ourselves. And if there is one thread that has run through all of it, one thing that each story and each teaching has been pointing toward, it is simply this: you do not need to be fixed. Not because there is nothing to learn, not because growth does not matter, but because the idea that you are broken, the idea that there is something fundamentally wrong with you that needs to be repaired before you can be whole, that idea is the only thing that was ever really in the way. The Buddha spent his entire life teaching this in one form or another. He said that every being already has the nature of awakening within them. Not someday, not after enough effort or practice or improvement. Already. Now. The way a seed already contains the tree. The way the moon already contains its light, shadows and all. And the Zen masters, in their own direct and sometimes playful way, said the same thing. One ancient teacher put it like this: from the very beginning, all beings are Buddha. Like water and ice, without water no ice, outside us no Buddhas. What he meant is that what we are looking for is not somewhere else. It is not in a better version of ourselves that we have not yet become. It is here. It is what we already are. The water does not need to become ice to be water. And we do not need to become something else to be whole. There is something deeply restful in this understanding. Not restful in the way of giving up or not caring, but restful in the way of finally, after a very long journey, arriving home, setting down your bag, kicking off your shoes, sitting down in a place that knows you, that has always known you, and letting out a long, slow breath. Because the truth is, the striving itself is what makes us so tired. Not the living, not the loving, not the working or the creating or the caring for others. Those things can be tiring in the way that good, honest work is tiring, the kind of tired that feels earned and satisfying. But the striving to be something other than what we are, the constant effort of trying to match an image that does not exist, that is a different kind of tired. It is the tiredness of fighting against ourselves. And it never leads to rest. Because there is always one more thing to fix, one more flaw to address, one more gap between who we are and who we think we should be. What if we just stopped? Not stopped caring, not stopped growing, but stopped fighting? What if we let this evening, this quiet time we have spent together, be a kind of permission? Permission to be here, just as you are. Permission to have the feelings you have. Permission to be imperfect in all the ways you are imperfect, and to let that be okay. Not just tolerable, not just acceptable, but actually genuinely okay. Because you are the whole of the moon, every part of you. Let us explore one last small story before we rest. There was once an old potter who had spent his entire life making bowls. His hands were rough and strong from decades of working with clay. His workshop was small and warm, lit by a single window, and the shelves along the walls were lined with bowls of every size and shape. One day, a young visitor came to see him. She had heard about his work from a friend and had traveled a long way to see it for herself. She stepped into the workshop and was immediately struck by the warmth of it, the smell of earth and glaze, the soft light, the quiet. It felt like a place where things were made with love. She picked up one of his bowls and turned it over in her hands, admiring its shape, the gentle curve of it, the weight of it in her palm, the soft glaze that caught the light from the window. It was simple and beautiful, the kind of object that makes you want to hold it and not put it down. And then she noticed something. A small crack along one side, barely visible, running like a thin river through the glaze. She traced it with her finger. "This one is flawed," she said, setting it down carefully, almost apologetically. "It has a crack." The old potter looked at her. Then he picked up the bowl, gently, the way you might pick up a sleeping bird, and held it in his weathered hands. He ran his thumb along the crack, slowly, the way you might trace a familiar path on a map. "Yes," he said, "this is one of my favorites." The young woman was confused. "But it is cracked," she said. "It is not perfect." The old potter smiled, a smile that held many years of making things and watching them break and learning what to do next. "In my tradition," he said, "we have a practice of repairing broken things with gold. We do not try to hide the crack or pretend it never happened. We fill it with something precious so that the place of mending becomes the most beautiful part of the whole piece. The crack is not something to be ashamed of. It is not a failure. It is where the light gets in. It is where the gold lives." He turned the bowl slowly in the late afternoon light, and the young woman saw it then. The thin line of gold running through the glaze, catching the sun, glowing softly, almost alive. It was, she had to admit, the most beautiful part of the whole bowl. More beautiful than the smooth, unbroken glaze on either side. More beautiful because it told a story. Because it was honest. Because it did not pretend to be something it was not. "We are like this," the old potter said quietly, setting the bowl gently back on the shelf. "Our cracks, our breaks, our places of mending, they are not what make us less. They are what make us real. They are what make us ours. And real, my dear, is far more beautiful than perfect ever was." This old practice of mending with gold has been cherished for centuries, and it holds, in its simplicity, everything we have been exploring tonight. The idea that our broken places are not evidence of failure. They are not things to be hidden or ashamed of or covered over with walls. They are the places where something precious can come through. They are where the light enters. And you have so many of these places. Every mistake you have made, every time you have fallen short, every moment of struggle and doubt and fear, these have all left their marks on you. And those marks are not ugly. They are the map of a life fully lived. They are the evidence of a heart that has been open enough to feel, brave enough to try, tender enough to be hurt. You would not trade any of it, not really, because all of it has made you who you are tonight. This person, lying here, listening, breathing, resting, this beautifully imperfect, endlessly whole, golden cracked, incomparably alive human being. So as the evening settles in around you and the quiet deepens, you might let yourself rest in this. Not in an idea, not in a teaching, but in the simple, warm, direct experience of being here, of being you, of being enough. The Buddha's last words to his students were, "Be a light unto yourself," not someone else's light, your own, the light that has been shining quietly inside you this whole time, through every season of your life, through every difficult day and every sleepless night and every moment of doubt. It has never gone out. It cannot go out. It is what you are. And tonight, you can rest in that light. You can let it hold you. You can let it warm you from the inside the way a candle warms a room, not by burning brightly or proving anything, but simply by being lit. You are enough. You have always been enough. And you can rest now. Let the breath be soft. Let the body be heavy. Let the mind grow still, like a lake at dusk, reflecting whatever is above it, without effort, without trying, without needing to be anything other than what it is. You are the whole of the moon, and you are beautiful. And so we come to the end of our time together, dear friend. We have walked a long and gentle road this evening. We have sat in mountain kitchens and walled gardens. We have watched travelers set down their heavy packs. We have listened to the rain falling on the garden of the heart. And through it all, one quiet truth has been whispering beneath every story and every teaching. You are already whole. You are already enough. Not a future version of you. Not a better version. This one, the one who is here right now, breathing softly in the dark. A great Zen master once wrote, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be at home in all things." Tonight, may you be at home in your body, at home in your breath, at home in this imperfect, precious, irreplaceable life that is yours and yours alone. May you carry with you, into sleep and into the morning that follows, even a small taste of the freedom we touch tonight. The freedom of being without anxiety about non-perfection. The freedom of knowing that the biscuits of this moment, your biscuits, are more than enough. May you sleep deeply. May you sleep peacefully. And may you wake, when the time comes, with a little more kindness in your heart for this world, for the people in it, and most of all, for yourself. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.